Every strand of hair is meticulously inspected in this calligraphy brush. That's one reason it costs about $1,000. And if you combine it with top-of-the-line ink sticks, stones, and paper, calligraphy tools can set you back $8,000. So why would anyone spend so much just to write?
That practice has just sort of grown into a brush and ink practice on paper, up into a more modern usage that is really sort of like a refined, high form of art.
Here are the stories behind some of the priciest calligraphy tools, starting with solid ink sticks made in Japan. This is ink. Toshitsugu Okabe is kneading it until it's as soft as a rice cake. It's imperative for him to be as thorough as possible because a well-kneaded mixture becomes high-quality calligraphy ink. It takes at least 4 years of aging before these solid ink sticks can be sold, and even longer for the most expensive ones. A 200-gram high-grade ink stick from this producer, Kobayen, costs over $1,000, and for some other brands, prices can reach almost $2,000. Meanwhile, almost double the amount of commercial liquid India ink can go for less than $9. So why are solid ink sticks so sought after? And why are they so expensive? It's January in Japan's Nara Prefecture. Ink producer Kobayen has been making Japanese calligraphy ink for 450 years. This type of ink, also known as sumi, is traditionally sold in the form of handmade solid ink sticks. To use the dry ink stick, calligraphers rub it on an inkstone to mix it with water. Sumi ink is typically black, but it can also be tinted brown or blue. The ingredients are simple: soot, animal glue, and perfume. But the quality of these materials and the time-intensive techniques required to collect and process them have a large impact on the final price. It starts in this room, lit by 100 oil lamps. This workshop has 4 rooms like this, where artisans produce all the soot they require to make ink. 2 workers are in charge of this stage, each overseeing 2 rooms and 200 oil lamps. They carefully manage the vegetable oil in the lamps and gradually collect soot throughout the day. In Japan, this process is called catching smoke. Every day, artisans light all 400 lamps and cover each with a lid, the underside of which collects soot as the oil burns. But they can't just leave the lid in the same place for hours, because overheating it will prevent soot from accumulating. The flame must be off-center, and the artisans must rotate the lid every 20 minutes for 2 hours. The artisans scrape the soot off the top of the lid. They replenish the oil, and the process starts all over, for a total of 5 times a day for each lamp. These lamps contain rapeseed oil, the most common choice when producing high-grade ink sticks. Ink sticks made of soot from even more expensive oils like paulownia, camellia, or sesame can easily cost up to 4 times as much. But artisans must also consider other details, like the containers that hold the oil and the material of the wig. To ensure the quality of the soot, they use non-porous earthenware containers. Craftspeople in this workshop even weave the wigs themselves to exacting specifications.
非常に細い芯で小さな炎で炊き上げると、おのずとそこで作り上げるすすの方も非常に粒子の細かなものになってくれるわけなんですよ。やはり非常に紙の中に深く食い込んでくれるという、そういう側面があるもんですから、粒子の細かなすすで作り上げた墨の方が非常に色も立体感のある非常に鮮やかな黒色を発色してくれますので。
The fineness of the soot grains determines the final price. Then there's the binding agent, animal glue. Unlike most of its modern liquid ink counterparts, which use shellac, Sumi ink typically uses cattle glue. For the most expensive ink sticks, artisans sometimes mix in other types of glue, such as donkey, deer, and goat. Corbayen says this improves the ink's glossiness and texture. The company buys glue specially made for Sumi ink, which comes in a dry board-like form. Artisans dissolve it by mixing it with 70 degrees Celsius water, which takes over an hour and a half. According to Corbayen, dissolving the glue slowly at a low temperature is key to producing quality ink.
非常に穏やかなくっつき合いになってくると。そこにニカワというのが介在してくれるおかげで、細かな話ですけど、ニカワの分子が細かなすすの分子をくるんでくれてるわけですね。ですからすずりの上で吸っていくと非常にスムーズに液体になってくる。
But animal glue can have a bad smell, so Sumi ink makers add fragrance like borneol and musk to counteract it.
で香料を入れるというのはむしろ今はその気持ちを落ち着けるということの作用の方が非常に大きな役割を果たしてくれてると思いますね。
The next step is to knead the soot, glue, and fragrance into a soft dough. The dough is kneaded every morning, by hand and foot. Doshitsugu takes care to knead it thoroughly, so the soot and glue are evenly distributed. That way, the solid stick can eventually dissolve into homogeneous liquid ink. Once he's properly kneaded the dough, Doshitsugu cuts it into balls and weighs them for consistency. Then he places the balls into molds and uses a machine to press them into shape. Improperly kneaded dough results in ink sticks that don't produce rich color.
中がなんていうんですか、しっかり揉まれてる状態ですぐ型に入れないと、あんまり、時間かけると外側だけカピカピになって、なんていうんですか、干からびて中がちゃんと揉めてないっていう状態になってしまうんでね。それでもちょっと急がないといけないですね。
Corbayen makes about 6,000 of its smallest, highest quality ink sticks a month. It employs a handful of artisans for this, and the ones tasked with kneading require the most experience. It takes 5 years to train as a Sumi ink craftsperson, but 10 years before they're allowed to make high-quality ink. Corbayen produces almost 40,000 of its smallest Sumi ink sticks between October and April, when the cooler weather of winter ensures the glue can harden during shaping. But the work isn't done yet. Drying the ink sticks too quickly will cause them to crack, making them unsellable. So artisans rely on a traditional technique using oak ash to slowly absorb moisture from the sticks over a long period of time. They start by covering the sticks in moist ashes. Each day, they swap yesterday's ashes with drier ones. They repeat this process for up to 40 days until the ink sticks are about 70% dry. After, they hang the sticks with straw and air dry them in-house for up to 6 months. Properly drying and maturing an ink stick takes at least 4 years. The longer the sticks dry and age, the better they perform and the more expensive they become. Corbayen itself has ink sticks that are hundreds of years old.
一般的にその人間の人生というかね、そういったものの年代に重ね合わせて説明されることもありますけど今おっしゃったように非常に古くなれば古くなるほどということは言えると思いますね。百貨店さんですとかその専門店さんで販売されてるその日本の墨にしても中国の古い墨にしてもね、やっぱりそうですね、数百万100万200万のものも拝見したことはございますし、
Finally, artisans polish them and apply the finishing touches. Now they're ready to be sold to calligraphers like Sho Azakami. Calligraphers like Sho traditionally prefer ink sticks to liquid ink. But in order to write with a sumi ink stick, he must first transform it into a liquid. This requires an inkstone and water. Sho adds a small amount of water and rubs the ink stick on the stone, breaking it apart. He mixes the two to make the liquid ink, adding more water or more dry ink until he gets the consistency he needs.
することで心を落ち着かせる、書く前の準備段階ということで、墨をすることで心を落ち着かせ、書に集中するというふうに思っております。吸って書くっていうことで、書き心地も全然違いますし、やはり固形木の良さっていうのを、しっかりと分かった上で吸って使っています。
But not all sumi inks provide him with the same writing experience.
そうですね、書き心地に関してはやはり墨の粒子の質であったりっていうので、滑らかさであったり墨の伸びであったりっていうのはもちろん違います。書いた後の黒の質っていうのもやはり質のいいものの方が黒の深みであったりそういうものがよく現れますね。
95% of Japan's sumi ink is made here, in Nara Prefecture. Sumi ink production in Japan is said to have begun in the 7th century, when Chinese ink-making methods were introduced by monks. By the 14th century, sumi ink use was flourishing in Japan. Though its primary use is for calligraphy, it's also often used for ink paintings, known as sumie. And because Corbayen must age its ink sticks for several years before it can sell them, consistent production is necessary, or else its supply won't meet the demand. But that doesn't mean the company wants to ramp up its production.
けどもその効率を重視してでものを作るというのは大事なことなんでしょうけども、効率だけではどうしても昔ながらのいいものが作れないというのが。
Corbayen strives to continue making calligraphy ink using the same techniques and of the same quality as its founders.
そうするそれを一つの目標として掲げていると非常に手間がかかって、例えばロスがあったとしてもそれを続けていくというのが一番大事な会社の目標となっていると考えてるんですけど。
Next, we explore the perfectly crafted calligraphy brush, a tool that translates the inkstick maker's skill onto the paper. A high-quality brush gives a calligrapher greater control over the ink, allowing them to showcase their mastery through precise lines and strokes.
If a single hair is out of place on a high-end calligraphy brush, it must be removed. This intense attention to detail is part of why these brushes can cost over $1,000. You can find a beginner brush for less than $15, but for handmade brushes custom designed for a master calligrapher, artisans spend months turning raw hair into a perfect brush tip. But what makes these brushes unique? And why are they so expensive? Calligraphy is a respected art form in Japan and has been practiced for centuries. But today, there aren't many skilled brush makers left. Yoshiyuki Hata is a third-generation brush maker and has been making calligraphy brushes since he was a teenager.
この筆がね、1本作るのに20年かかって、私が50から作り始めて、今70でちょうど完成したんです。
His family's workshop in Kawajiri focuses on what they call no-compromise craftsmanship. Each brush tip is handmade by a single artisan. But making these brushes isn't easy.
この線が出したい線、それに合う筆を作ることですね。
For a master calligrapher like Daiso Kaneko, small differences in a brush's hardness or ink retention can drastically affect the lines it can produce.
表現したいと思った時にこの微妙な5ミリの差とか 長さの差とか、本当に少しの硬さ、柔らかさや、それから毛のバネの強さとか、いろんなことが筆っていうのは一本一本違うので。
The dozens of steps involved in brush making start with selecting the hair. Different types of hair have a big impact on the price of a brush. Yoshiyuki's specialty is one of the priciest, goat hair. This hair was collected 50 years ago from the chest of Yangtze River Delta white goats. Hair from this specific breed of goat is classified as type 3 hair, based on its size, luster, and elasticity. It's a highly sought-after hair for brush making because it's soft yet durable and retains ink well.
初心者いうか学童さんが使うのはやっぱり硬い筆、馬、タヌキ。だんだん柔らかいのは今の羊毛筆なんかは腕が上級者じゃないと使えないんで。
But today, this type of hair is hard to find in large quantities and can cost thousands of dollars per kilogram. Selecting high-quality hair is done entirely by eye, and it's one of the hardest skills for a new brush maker to learn.
原毛用で言ったら色、艶、耐久性、あと見てこれは10年20年持たないないうな毛はそこで一本一本こう寄る時に抜いていくんですよね。
But this long process is just beginning. Once the hairs are chosen, they're boiled and combed to remove any fluff. This process separates straight, long hairs, which are ideal for brush making. One of the most time-consuming steps is aligning all of these hairs. This delicate work is key to making a uniform brush, but it's largely based on experience and instinct.
とにかく自分の目と手でこうやって揃えた分が完成形なんよね、先揃えの。
Throughout the process, brush makers patiently remove any imperfect or damaged hairs.
そうですね、無駄毛あんだけ取ったらもう毛がなくなるんじゃないか言われるんですが、それもこれだけ出るいうんを頭に置いて設計をするからあれだけ取って取らないと描くのに割れたりとかいい線が出ないからね。もう、まあ、筆作りを始めたのがやはり工房が遊び場だったんで、ちっちゃい頃からそれはね200パターンぐらいは頭の中にあるんですよね、設計図が。まあやっぱし目と手と勘ですよね。
At this stage, Yoshiyuki's vision for a brush starts to take shape. After trimming, he wets the hair and combines different bundles to create a brush that is dense and durable. Then he dips the hair in funori, an adhesive liquid made from seaweed, to hold the hairs together.
あと書道家の先生だから出た毛が1ミリ2ミリ0コマ何ミリ言われるから、それに工程でも手を抜いたらその筆は僕はダメじゃもし思いますね。魂が入っとらんから。
The finished brush tip is almost unrecognizable from the raw hair. But the precise work isn't over yet. Once the hair dries, Yoshiyuki ties up the ends and burns each one with a hot iron, binding the hairs together. Any mistake here could ruin a month of work. Finally, it's time to assemble the brush. Like the brush tip, each handle is custom made.
軸はやはり軸屋さんいて、これは奈良の私たちみたいな親子でやってる職人さんが、太さが皆先生によって手の筆圧大きさが違う。
This time-consuming process, along with the materials used, means these brushes can cost 100 times more than a mass-produced brush. The price varies based on the size and type of brush. A larger brush requires more hair, which naturally increases the price. Hata Bunshindo brushes often cost around $1,300, but some brushes can cost a lot more.
僕が作った筆の中で一番高いものは200万ぐらいのものになります。先代が作ったものですと300万ぐらいのものがあります。
Despite the high price, these brushes are essential tools for calligraphers like Daizo. He followed in the footsteps of his father and grandfather and has been practicing calligraphy for 20 years.
だから自分がイメージしているものに筆を合わせてくる場合と、筆で作品がイメージが膨らんでいくというか、これは優しい表現をしたいときは少し柔らかいそういうことを選びますし、きちっとしたものを描きたいときは少し短めのちょっと硬めの筆を選んだりということで、自分に合う筆っていうのを探していくのは非常に楽しいですし。
Some brush makers mix natural and synthetic hair to make brushes more affordable, but Yoshiyuki remains committed to using only the highest quality materials. Kozo, Yoshiyuki's son, will be the workshop's fourth generation brush maker.
やはり父も職人であまり言葉を通して伝えるっていうことはしないしできない人間なので、自分が見て学ぶ、それから作っていったものの結果がいいものになれば父はうなる、よし、それ悪ければもうただひたすら違う。
But like many traditional crafts, the future of brush making is unclear. Demand for handmade brushes is in decline. Some brush makers have started selling makeup brushes to bring in new customers. But the main concern for Yoshiyuki and his family is the lack of raw materials.
5代目がこれから出てくるのか、それからその人がやるときにいい原料が果たしてあるのかっていうものが一番懸念してますね。筆業界全体が作る人が減ってきたり、書道業界の人口も減っているので、やはり下火にはなるんですが、それは常にずっとこれから僕が職人人生の中で課題にあると思います。
Goso Hata is less optimistic about the future of calligraphy, but contemporary calligraphers like Vincent prefer to keep things traditional. The process of putting a handmade brush to hand-ground ink is a part of the meditative calligraphy experience.
That sort of experience of having this relationship with this beautiful ink stick, beautiful ink stone, in turn will affect that artist's energy as they're writing calligraphy. So I think all of these things play into one another in a way that's completely interconnected and just shares a really important and beautiful relationship through history.
Guan Yuk-su will spend hours sawing this natural red rock into the perfectly sized calligraphy inkstone. He sells his smaller inkstones for $750, but larger ones can cost more than $2,200. Some professional calligraphers prefer grinding their ink on an inkstone, even though they could use more affordable liquid ink. So, what makes these inkstones so expensive, and why would calligraphers still use this ancient method?
이 소리를 들어보면은 이 약간 둔탁한 소리가 나거든요. 퍽퍽퍽 약간. 근데 지금 이거는 내가 캔돌인데 이거는 두들겨 보면은 이게 맑은, 그래도 이거는 퍽퍽 소리가 이건 맑은 소리가 나죠. 요거는 좋은 돌이에요. 벼루로 쓸 수 딱 좋은 돌이에요.
The process of creating these expensive inkstones starts here, just 12 kilometers away from Hyuk-su's workshop in Jincheon, South Korea. This is where he collects the red stone for his prized calligraphy inkstones.
아, 이거 돌은 좋은데 너무 커. 가지고 가고 싶은데.
Hyuk-su avoids stones that have been exposed to air as they make for poor inkstones. It's important that the stone isn't cracked and the surface is as uniform as possible. The type of stone Hyuk-soo uses, Sangsan Jasok, is only available here. When he finds a stone that meets all of his qualifications and is easy enough to lift, he heads back to his workshop in Jincheon. Now, he can start the slow and grueling process of transforming it into a sellable inkstone. Hyuk-soo must first saw the stone into the size he desires. He does this the traditional way. No chainsaws or power tools, just physical force and a handsaw. To avoid injuring himself or damaging the stone, he secures it tightly.
고정시켜주는 거예요, 이렇게 움직이지 않게.
It's too hard to do alone, so Hyuk-soo's friend assists.
스티치 살면서 그 형님이신데 제 일을 많이 도와주고 있죠.
They push and pull the saw until it's a little over an inch deep, where Hyuk-soo can begin to chip away at the parts he doesn't need.
됐어요.
But manipulating this rock doesn't get any easier. Hyuk-soo's only tools are chisels, grinding stones, and brushes for dusting debris.
그럼 이걸 날을 또 세워줘야 되잖아요. 그 날을 세우려면 옛날에 낫도 그렇고 다 도구를 다 이 숫돌에 갈았잖아요. 이 숫돌에 갈아서 쓰는 거예요. 이 숫돌 처음 봐요?
네, 저는 처음 봐요.
아, 도시분이시구나. 시골에 이거 다 많이 썼어요.
He does every part of the process with his hands and shoulders. A beautiful inkstone is more valuable, so Hyuk-soo micromanages every step to make sure no flaws show up in the finished product. He flattens the bottom so it's perfectly level. Trying to fix it later will risk damaging the design he'll engrave into the other side. Most inkstones have three basic elements: a flat surface to rub the ink stick, a groove where the ink accumulates, and a border where artisans create designs. The flat grinding surface slopes into the collection pool, so the water and ground ink can flow easily. This shape is vital to the inkstone's functionality and value, so it must be perfected.
손 힘으로만 안 되니까 그 힘이 모자르니까 그 어깨로 밀어서 그 힘을 내는 거죠. 오래 하면은 괜찮아요. 굳은 살도 이걸 하면은. 아, 어깨가 아무래도 벌겋게 그 멍도 들고 아프고 그랬죠.
After countless hours of chiseling and scraping, millimeter by millimeter, the surface is complete. Now it's time for the border. Today, Hyuk-soo is working on a relatively simple design, plum blossoms.
아, 이제 요런 꽃잎 같은데 그 꽃잎을 만들려면은 테두리가 얇은데 그런 데에 그 조심해서 다뤄야지. 그렇지 않으면 아무래도 흠집이 생기죠.
He engraves every minute detail along the border. More intricate designs require more labor and time, so they're more expensive. But while the hardest part is done, Hyuk-soo says the inkstone is not yet worthy of a high price. That happens during polishing, which gives the inkstone its most important property, being smooth yet sharp. Hyuk-soo uses an abrasive stone and sandpaper to polish the inkstone. This creates an overall smooth look, but Hyuk-soo says the process also sharpens the outer layer of stone particles. That way, the stone can grind the ink stick into a fine powder.
그게 복목의 가장 결의 생명이죠.
The sharpness of the stone particles directly impacts how well the inkstone performs. and in turn, its final value.
이 사진이 20배 확대해서 본 사진인데 요 돌 그 입자가 여기 환하게 보이지요. 요게 이거 잘 서 있느냐 들 서 있느냐에 따라서 벼루가 잘 갈리는 겁니다. 이 복망이 잘 서야 벼루가 잘 갈리고 그래 이게 복망이 안 서면은 먹이 안 갈립니다.
Once he's satisfied with the result, Hyuk-soo applies lacquer for protection and longevity. The inkstone is now ready for sale and use by calligraphers. Vincent Chong is a contemporary calligraphy artist. They use inkstones and inksticks for some of their work, even though liquid ink is popular with modern calligraphers due to its ease of use.
The first thing that I'd think of is either the sound or the smell of grinding ink.
Vincent says inkstones allow for a level of control that bottled ink can't offer.
So using an inkstone allows you to really tailor the quality of the ink to exactly what you want to do, and it also just seems to work out better always. And whatever additional stuff is in a bottle of ink just isn't quite as nice on the paper. I think at this point you can sort of see that the laborious quality of this process creates some energetic or psychological feeling of preciousness with this little bead of ink that you've worked so diligently to produce, which I guess just makes the experience feel more special.
While Vincent isn't in the position to buy a multi-$1,000 inkstone at the moment, it's something they aspire to.
Yeah, I feel like it would give you this sort of energetic connection to another craftsperson, another artist. And in that regard, I think it just makes the experience a little more special, because so much care has been taken on the part of that artisan just so that you can have this really special experience of your own, in your own art practice, of your own sort of creative, generative kind of practice. I guess that's a little bit scary to use something that's so precious, but it's funny because we're talking so specifically about rocks, and stones have been just around for such a long time, and humans have had this sort of fascination with them for such a long time that treating them preciously feels really natural. But at the same time, they have this life, and you should sort of allow them to engage with other parts of the physical world in a way that, gives them the generosity that they deserve, having been around so long.
Hyuk-soo similarly admires the preciousness of the stones. He appreciates the properties of Sangsan Jasok that make it invaluable to his work and craft.
이게 이제 물속에 있는 돌인데 이게 물속에서 건진 거지요. 이게 물에서 얼마 동안 있었는지를 모르잖아요. 한 달이 있었는지 1년이 있었는지. 보이시죠? 여기 지금 물기가 하나도 없잖아요. 이게 물을 절대 흡수를 안 한다는 거죠. 돌이. 상산 자석.
Sangsan Jasok inkstones were considered a luxury product during the Joseon dynasty, which began around 1400. But production died down during the Japanese colonization of Korea in the 1910s. But Hyuk-soo, a third-generation master and one of 4 remaining inkstone artisans in Korea, is putting it back on the map.
스승님께서 2000년도에 여기서 만드시다가 예주로 가시는 바람에 이 상산 자석이 없어지게 됐어요. 그때 생각에는 먹고 사는 데는 지장이 없겠구나 하는 생각에서 시작을 하게 된 거죠. 그러다가 이제 점점 사양길에 들고 그러다 보니까 이제 중간에 그만두게 됐던 거죠. 그래도 제 와이프가 생활 전선에 나서서 도와주는 바람에 이때까지 하게 된 거죠. 상산 자석이라는 유명한 돌이 참 이름이 없어진다는 것에 대해서 안타까웠는데 그래도 제가 이 맥을 잇고 있다는데 보람을 느끼고 있죠.
While much of the inkstone industry has been mechanized, Hyuk-soo believes the only way to keep Sungsan Jasuk inkstones alive is by making them by hand. And for contemporary calligraphers like Vincent, this tradition is a constant source of inspiration as they make their own space in the long and continuing history of calligraphy.
Being able to reconnect with the brush marks and thus sort of like the bodily gestures of artists of the past, I think was restorative in a way that helped me feel connected to this artistic lineage and culture. Especially as queer and trans people, I feel like it feels so clear that our communities have been at the heart of artistic communities for all of like human history, whether or not we've been erased, whether or not our stories have been passed down. So being able to sort of access those artists who, maybe had, maybe were queer or trans, but we just don't have those stories today. I think being able to access their work through calligraphy was sort of one of the things that drew me to the practice.
Finally, calligraphers can't expect a flawless final piece without quality paper. China's yuan paper, Japanese washi paper, and Korea's hanji paper are all designed to control ink absorption and withstand the test of time. This swampy mush is about to become some of the world's most expensive paper. At first, hanji is barely visible, and once it emerges from this bath, it's delicate. But after it dries, Korean paper can last thousands of years. The most expensive version of a single sheet this size costs over $22. So what makes hanji so long-lasting? And why is it so expensive? Kang Kupsok has been making hanji for 45 years. The fibres he's washing were once the bark of a paper mulberry tree.
이걸로 한 1,500장 정도 장수로 그 정도 나올 거예요 아마.
Hanji is a versatile material that's prized within Korea. Today, it's used for everything from calligraphy to clothing. And because of its strength, institutions like the Library of Congress and the Louvre have used hanji to restore centuries-old books. The secret to its strength are these long web-like fibres and the traditional method of sheet forming. After boiling, bleaching, and painstakingly cleaning each fibre, it's time to head inside. Kang uses this machine to transform the tough fibres into a mushy pulp.
처음부터 끝까지 다 힘든 공정이라고 생각이 드는데 같은 일을 반복해서 날마다 몇십 년 한다는 건 그건 참 쉬운 문제 아니잖아요. 어려운 문제 사실.
Now, it's time to turn pulp into paper. Fibres flow across the bamboo frame and settle into transparent layers, almost invisible to the naked eye. But Kang sees what we can't. He knows the exact moment when a sheet is fully formed. After decades of papermaking, he's able to produce 350 sheets per day. The amount of fibres on a sheet and their direction determines the strength of the paper. Moving the frame in one direction aligns the grain. But the most expensive paper is made by agitating the fibres in multiple directions. This is slower, but it evenly distributes the fibres, yielding stronger paper. Each weight of paper requires a different amount of pulp, and Kang's experience is the key to getting good results.
예를 들어서 40g이다 하면 40g의 일정에 똑같이 맞춰야 돼. 하루 종일.
Careful sheet forming is important because the fibre structure determines how a paper holds up over time, especially if it's being folded. Kung says this process can take 4 years to learn. And he has to be careful because at this stage, hanji is still delicate.
물방울 한 방울만 떨어져도 빵꾸 빵 나니까 굉장히 조심을 하는 거죠.
He uses an automated pump to speed up the process, but it still requires close attention.
뭐 다른 생각하고 있다가 아차하면 두꺼워지잖아요. 그럼 그 실수지 그게 잘못 나온 종이니까. 그러니까 정신 바짝 차리고 만들어야 똑같은 종이를 일정하지.
Despite hanji's versatility, the ingredients are simple: water, fibre, and glue. Premium conservation-grade hanji uses a natural glue made from hibiscus root, which disperses the fibres across a sheet. This type of hanji has a neutral pH, which is one of the requirements to be classified as permanent paper, and it's ideal for restoring old documents. In fact, one study found that hanji aged 2 to 3 times slower than paper from medieval Europe. For less expensive hanji, Kung uses a chemical glue. While Kung immerses himself in flowing water, the other side of the workshop is dedicated to drying the freshly formed sheets. Yoon Chungge tears the crisp, clean hanji off a hot plate set to 88 degrees Celsius. She's been working with hanji for 40 years.
네, 지금 옛날에는 이걸 나무로 떼서 만들기도 말리기도 했고 연탄으로 떼서 말리기도 했지만 두꺼운 한지들은 이제 온도가 높은 온도에서 좀 말리기도 하고 좀 얇은 한지 같은 경우에는 낮은 온도에서 말리기도 하는데 이 종이는 표고용으로 많이 쓰기도 하고 서해용으로 많이 쓰기도 하는데 종이가 좀 두꺼워요.
She dries paper used for conservation at a lower temperature, around 40 to 50 degrees.
낮은 온도 서서히 말리는 온도들이 종이들이 더 질기고 좋아요.
After a lifetime of working with hanji, this process has become muscle memory. Her horsehair brush is an extension of her hand, used to smooth out hanji without scratching it. This workshop used to be bustling with dozens of employees, but Kung says he's had to downsize as demand has decreased.
해 넘어가더라까지 했으니까 장수야 지금보다는 많았지요. 이제 배 이상도 했었지. 이제 사양길에 접어들다 보니까 이제 수요가 이제 점점 줄어가지고.
Artisans sell the most expensive hanji to institutions and museums that use it for conservation, like repairing pages in books or even fixing sculptures. But Kang says demand for this type of hanji isn't that high. It's also more expensive and labour-intensive to make, since he must beat the fibres by hand instead of pulverising them in this machine. In Korea, hanji has been used for over 1,000 years, but in the West, conservationists often train on washi paper from Japan. And while some Western institutions have recognised hanji's quality, widespread use abroad isn't common. Kang says he's stopped exporting hanji and only sells domestically. In recent years, the South Korean government has started initiatives to increase demand for hanji, but it will take time before artisans feel the benefits of these programs.
이 업을 이제 택하게 된 건데 업이 될 줄은 몰랐지. 이렇게 끝까지 사라져 가는 거죠. 이제 그런 것들이 좀 아쉽고 그렇지. 이제 없어져서는 안 될 거라고 보거든 우리네가 봤을 때는. 근데 수요가 없으니까 결국은 만드는 사람으로서는 돈벌이가 안 되면 문제가 있잖아요. 이게 우리네가 만들어서 계속 뭐 이게 쟁이고 보고만 있을 수는 없잖아요. 팔아야 먹고 사니까.
Despite hanji's uncertain future, artisans like Kang continue to maintain this ancient craft, and many are working tirelessly to bring new uses and awareness, hopeful that the hanji industry can last as long as the paper itself.